I never planned for the evening to feel unusual. It was supposed to be simple, just stopping by my friend's house to drop off something he'd left with me earlier in the day. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of calm that comes only after dusk when the heat of the sun has faded and street lamps hum faintly in their orange glow. My footsteps echoed softly against the sidewalk as I made my way up to the familiar front door. When I knocked, though, it wasn't my friend who answered. Instead, the door opened slowly to reveal his mother. She stood there, framed in the warm spill of light from the hallway behind her, and for a second I almost forgot why I'd come. Her presence had always carried a kind of quiet authority. She was graceful in a way that didn't demand attention but somehow always drew it. Tonight, with her hair loosely gathered at the nape of her neck and a soft cardigan draped over her shoulders, she looked different. Relaxed. Comfortable. Yet there was something in her eyes, bright, knowing, that made me feel suddenly self-conscious. "You're here alone?" I asked, glancing past her shoulder, half expecting my friend to appear. She smiled in that subtle way of hers, one corner of her mouth lifting just enough to feel like she was letting me in on a secret. "He's out for the night. But you're welcome to come in." I hesitated. For reasons I couldn't quite explain, the simple invitation made my chest tighten. The house felt quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that presses in on you, where every small sound seems amplified. I caught the faint scent of her perfume as the cool night air slipped past us into the hallway, something floral but warm, a scent that felt more personal than casual. "Don't just stand there," she teased lightly, tilting her head. "Come on in." And so I stepped inside. The door clicked softly behind me, and just like that, the outside world felt far away. As I slipped off my shoes, I found myself noticing little details I'd overlooked before. The soft glow of the lamp in the corner, the faint music humming low from the kitchen radio, the way her slippers whispered against the hardwood floor as she walked ahead of me. Each small thing seemed heightened by the fact that it was just the two of us here. She turned back, her eyes catching mine for a moment longer than expected. There was nothing inappropriate in her look, nothing that could be spoken aloud, but still, it lingered. I swallowed, suddenly aware of how fast my own heartbeat felt. I told myself it was just the surprise of seeing her instead of my friend, but deep down, a quiet thought pressed forward: tonight might not be like any other visit. I followed her into the house, still adjusting to the quiet atmosphere. Normally, when I came over, the place buzzed with noise, my friend's music playing too loud from his room, a television echoing in the living room, the sound of footsteps going up and down the stairs. But tonight, there was none of that. Just the low hum of the kitchen radio and the occasional creak of the floorboards under her steps. She stopped near the hallway closet, reaching to take my coat. Her fingers brushed mine just for a second as I handed it over. It was the lightest contact, but it felt deliberate, or maybe I just imagined it was. Either way, the touch sent a small jolt through me, and I tried not to let it show. "You seem tense," she said with a small smile, folding my coat neatly over her arm. Her voice carried a warmth that was both playful and curious, as if she were reading me more carefully than I realized. I shook my head quickly, forcing a laugh. "No, just wasn't expecting him to be out tonight, I guess." She tilted her head slightly, studying me for a moment, and then her eyes flicked toward the front door. "Well," she said in a tone half serious, half teasing, "close the door, would you? And let me have my fun." Her words landed in a way I didn't expect. The remark was light, playful, almost careless, yet it clung to me like static. For a beat too long, I stood frozen in place, unsure if she realized how suggestive it had sounded. Her expression gave nothing away. She simply raised an eyebrow, waiting, amused by my hesitation. I reached back to push the door shut. The soft click echoed through the hallway, and suddenly the space felt smaller, more private. As if the world outside had been cut off. She brushed past me then, moving toward the living room. The faint swish of her cardigan brushed my sleeve, and her hand, whether on purpose or by chance, rested briefly on my arm as she passed. Her touch was casual, light as a whisper, yet my skin seemed to hold on to the memory of it long after she had moved away. "You really do look nervous," she said over her shoulder, the faintest trace of laughter in her voice. "Relax. I don't bite." That teasing lilt in her words stirred something inside me, a mix of embarrassment and fascination. I tried to steady myself, but every small glance, every subtle smile from her seemed to pull me deeper into a tension I hadn't prepared for. As we entered the living room, the golden lamplight settled over us, warm and soft. She gestured for me to sit, her movements unhurried, graceful, as though she knew I was watching her without meaning to. And I couldn't help but wonder, was she simply being playful, filling the silence of the evening with harmless teasing? Or had there been a weight behind her words, a meaning she left unsaid? Whatever the truth was, one thing became certain in that moment: tonight was not going to unfold the way I had expected. The living room felt strangely different without my friend sprawled across the couch or video games flickering on the screen. Instead, it was quiet, almost serene. A single lamp glowed in the corner, casting a golden hue across the room. It softened everything: the walls, the furniture, even the way she looked as she moved gracefully toward the coffee table. "Tea or coffee?" she asked, glancing back at me with a kind of casual warmth that seemed to hide something deeper. "Coffee's fine," I said quickly, though I wasn't really craving it. I just wanted a reason to stay. She disappeared into the kitchen, the faint clink of mugs and the sound of water filling a kettle carrying into the living room. I sat down on the couch, my hands resting awkwardly on my knees. The cushion still felt warm from earlier in the day, and I wondered if she had been sitting here before I arrived, lost in her own thoughts. When she returned, she carried 2 steaming cups, her steps unhurried. She handed me one, her fingers brushing mine as I took it. The ceramic was hot against my skin, but somehow it wasn't the heat of the cup that made my pulse quicken, it was that brief, deliberate contact, the way she lingered for just a moment too long. "Careful," she said softly, her eyes locking onto mine. "It's hot." I swallowed and nodded, trying not to overthink the way she said it. She sat beside me, close enough that I could feel the faint warmth of her body through the space between us. The scent of her perfume drifted toward me again, light and intoxicating, something floral with a trace of spice that seemed to match her perfectly, both soft and sharp at the same time. At first, we talked about ordinary things. Work. College. The kind of surface-level conversation that usually fades quickly. But with her, it didn't. Every word seemed to carry weight, as though she was listening with genuine interest. She asked questions no one else bothered to ask, and when she laughed, it was low and warm, the kind of laugh that made me want to hear it again. Somewhere in the middle of our conversation, she shifted slightly, turning her body more toward me. Her knee brushed against mine. It could have been an accident, but she didn't move it away. Instead, she leaned forward a little, her eyes catching the lamplight in a way that made them seem brighter, more alive. "You're different from most people," she said quietly, as if she was confessing something she shouldn't. "You notice things." Her words landed deep. I felt my chest tighten, not with nerves this time, but with something else, something I didn't have a name for yet. I wanted to answer, to tell her that she was the one who made me notice, that she carried a presence that made the world around her sharper, clearer. But before I could form the words, she smiled faintly, almost as though she had already read them in my silence. And in that golden glow, with her sitting so close, the space between us felt fragile, like something could shift at any moment. The coffee had cooled by the time our conversation drifted into quieter places. We had laughed about small things, her son's terrible cooking attempts, the way the old radio in the kitchen only picked up one station, but beneath the lightness, there was a kind of gravity pulling her words. She set her cup down on the table, fingers tracing absently along the rim before she leaned back into the couch. For the first time that night, her smile softened, and her gaze wandered past me, settling somewhere on the dim glow of the lamp. "You know," she began, her voice quieter now, "this house feels too big sometimes. Too quiet." I tilted my head, unsure if she was really speaking to me or simply to the silence around us. "Because he's out more often now?" I asked gently. She gave a small nod, her lips curving into a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. "He's grown. And that's how it should be, of course. I didn't realize how strange it would feel, to sit here at night and not hear anyone moving around upstairs. You spend so many years wishing for peace and quiet, and then, when you finally have it, it feels less like freedom and more like emptiness." Her words hung in the air, soft but heavy. I had never thought of her this way before, not just as someone's mother, but as a woman with her own quiet battles, her own aches that couldn't be seen from the outside. I set my cup down too, leaning forward slightly. My voice came out lower than I expected. That must feel lonely. She looked at me then, and the expression in her eyes startled me. It was raw, unguarded, like I'd touched a place she didn't often let anyone near. For a long moment, she didn't answer. She just studied me, as though weighing whether to let me stay in that space with her. Finally, she gave the smallest shrug. Sometimes. I think everyone wants to feel noticed. Needed. Even when they won't admit it. Something in me ached at the honesty in her voice. Almost without thinking, I reached across the small space between us and placed my hand gently over hers where it rested on the couch. Her fingers stilled beneath mine, but she didn't pull away. Instead, after a heartbeat, her thumb brushed lightly across the back of my hand, a quiet, subtle motion, but one that carried more meaning than words could. The room seemed to grow even quieter, the ticking of the clock on the wall suddenly loud in the stillness. My chest tightened, but not with nerves this time. It was something warmer, heavier, a connection that seemed to settle deep inside me. She sighed softly, almost inaudibly, and when she finally spoke again, her voice trembled just slightly. It's nice, having someone to talk to. Someone who listens. Her eyes glistened faintly in the lamplight, and in that moment, I understood, beneath her grace, beneath her teasing smiles and playful remarks, there was a quiet vulnerability she rarely let anyone see. And tonight, for reasons I couldn't explain, she had chosen to share it with me. Her hand still rested beneath mine, warm and steady, when she drew in a breath and leaned back just slightly. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, if anything, it felt fragile, almost sacred, but I could see it in her eyes. She didn't want the moment to become too heavy. She wanted to release some of that vulnerability she'd just let slip, to cover it with the kind of humor that always seemed to be her shield. You're far too serious for someone your age, she said finally, her lips curving into a teasing smile. Most guys your age can't sit still long enough for a real conversation. I gave a quiet laugh, though my chest was still tight from everything she'd just shared. Maybe I'm not like most guys. Her eyebrow arched at that, a playful glint sparking in her eyes. Oh? Is that supposed to impress me? I met her gaze, holding it a beat longer than I normally would have dared. Did it? Her laugh came soft, low, but there was something in it that made my pulse jump. She leaned in slightly, her hand slipping from beneath mine only so she could rest it lightly on my shoulder. The weight of it was casual, but her touch lingered, her fingers curling just enough to press through the fabric of my shirt. You're bold, she murmured, tilting her head in mock disapproval. Careful. Someone might get the wrong idea. My throat felt dry, but I managed a quiet smile. Maybe they'd be right. The air between us seemed to thicken. Her hand gave a subtle squeeze before she drew back, shaking her head with a soft laugh as if she were reminding herself not to take me too seriously. But the glow in her eyes betrayed her, she wasn't unmoved. She stood then, smoothing down her cardigan as though to gather herself. Taking a step toward the doorway, she paused and glanced back at me over her shoulder. Her hair slipped loose from behind her ear, brushing against her cheek as she gave me a look that was equal parts playful and testing. You know, she said slowly, her voice carrying that teasing lilt again, when you came in earlier, standing in the doorway like that. I should have said it clearer. She let the moment breathe, her smile widening just enough to make my pulse race. Close the door, and let me have my fun. The words landed differently this time, lighter on the surface, but underneath, there was no mistaking the charged undertone. I blinked, my mouth parting to answer, but no sound came out. She only laughed softly at my expression, crossing her arms with mock satisfaction. See? You're still nervous. I shook my head, though I couldn't hide the way my chest tightened, my heartbeat drumming in my ears. You just know how to keep me off balance. Good, she said simply, her voice dipping softer now, almost like a secret. And as she walked back toward the couch, her shoulder brushed against mine when she sat, closer than before, closer than necessary. The teasing had broken the heaviness, but it had also left something more behind, a spark neither of us could ignore. When she sat back down beside me, she didn't leave the usual polite space. Her knee brushed against mine, not by accident, not this time. She crossed her legs slowly, deliberately, the fabric of her cardigan grazing my arm as she settled in closer. The lamp's golden light caught the curve of her cheek, and I couldn't stop noticing the way it softened her face, the way it made her eyes seem almost luminous. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall and the low hum of the kitchen radio, distant and blurred, like it belonged to another world. Here, in the living room, it felt as if time had narrowed down to the smallest things, the space of a breath, the warmth of her presence, the subtle tension that hung in the air like static before a storm. She reached for her coffee, lifting the cup with both hands. As she sipped, her gaze flicked toward me, lingering longer than necessary. It wasn't bold, not quite. It was something quieter, a question she wasn't asking out loud. When she set the cup down again, her fingers rested on her knee, so close to mine that all it would take was the smallest shift for us to touch. I wanted to move, to bridge that tiny gap, but my body betrayed me. My chest felt tight, my throat dry. I could only sit there, caught in the pull of her nearness. Then she leaned in, just slightly. Enough that I could feel the faint warmth of her breath against my skin. Enough that I caught the subtle fragrance of her perfume again, floral with a whisper of spice, a scent that seemed more intoxicating the closer she came. Her eyes searched mine, soft and unhurried, and in them I saw a kind of hesitation that mirrored my own. It wasn't fear. It wasn't rejection. It was something more delicate, the awareness of a line, the weight of a choice neither of us had made yet. I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The sound made her lips curve faintly, almost as if she'd been waiting for me to break the silence. "You're quiet," she murmured, her voice low, almost teasing. "So are you," I answered, though my words came out softer than I intended, closer to a whisper. Her smile widened just a fraction. And then, without moving away, she let her hand shift slightly, just enough that her fingers brushed against mine. Not a full touch, not yet, but a feather-like grace that sent a current through me. I froze, and so did she. But neither of us pulled back. The silence grew heavier, thicker, until it felt like the room itself was holding its breath. Her lips parted, as though she was about to say something, but no words came. Only her gaze, steady and questioning, meeting mine in a way that said more than either of us could have spoken aloud. And in that fragile, suspended moment, it felt like one small move could change everything. The air between us felt so heavy it was almost tangible. My fingers still rested near hers, close enough to feel the faint warmth radiating from her skin, but not quite entwined. One small move, I thought, and nothing would be the same again. Her eyes lingered on mine for a heartbeat longer, then softened. She drew in a slow breath, leaning back just enough to ease the tension, though her hand stayed where it was. The corners of her mouth lifted into a faint, wistful smile. "You know," she said quietly, her voice low and thoughtful, "sometimes it's not about what we do. Sometimes it's about being reminded that we're still seen." The words sank into me with a weight that felt both gentle and profound. She wasn't asking for anything reckless, not tonight. What she wanted, what she needed, was simpler, deeper connection. To be understood. To feel alive in someone's gaze again. I nodded slowly, swallowing past the tightness in my throat. "You are seen," I said softly. "More than you realize." Her eyes glistened faintly in the lamplight, and for a moment she looked younger somehow, not in age but in spirit, like someone who had let go of a burden she'd been carrying too long. She gave a quiet laugh, not mocking, but touched. Then, without hesitation, she shifted closer and slipped her arms around me. The hug was unhurried, deliberate. Her cheek rested against my chest, the fabric of her cardigan brushing my neck as she leaned in. I froze for just a moment before my arms circled her waist, drawing her in gently. She was warm, steady, her heartbeat faint but undeniable against me. And in that silence, something passed between us that didn't need words, an unspoken promise, a quiet recognition that what we shared in this moment mattered. We stayed like that longer than I expected. The ticking clock, the hum of the radio, even the faint whoosh of cars passing outside, all of it faded until there was only the soft rhythm of her breathing, syncing with mine. Eventually, she pulled back just enough to look at me again. Her hand rose, brushing lightly across my cheek in a gesture so tender it made my chest ache. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" I asked, my voice equally soft. "For listening. For not running away. Her lips curved into a smile that carried both playfulness and sincerity. For reminding me I'm still allowed to feel this alive. I didn't trust myself to answer, so I just held her gaze, letting the truth of her words settle in the space between us. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door. Her hand lingered on mine as she opened it, squeezing gently before letting go. "Good night," she said, her voice warm, steady. "Good night," I echoed, stepping out into the cool night air. As the door clicked softly shut behind me, I felt the echo of her embrace still pressed against my chest, her warmth lingering long after I had gone. And I knew, with quiet certainty, that nothing between us would ever feel quite the same again.